Welcome to the Corporate Pilot Dad podcast, a place to discover aviation from real flying to flight simulation. I am a corporate pilot with over 7,000 hours of flight experience, and I'm joined by our co-host, Ian, the flight simmer and aviation enthusiast. And I'm Tim, the corporate pilot dad. Today, we're joined by Don, a retired air traffic controller who worked at Los Angeles Center. We'll discuss what it takes to become an air traffic controller, what the job is actually like, and also we'll dive into ATC communications and PilotEdge used on Flight Simulator 2020. Don, welcome to the podcast. Can you tell us what was the process like to become an air traffic controller?
Well, it's sort of varied, but back when I got in about 30 years ago, more people were being taken right off the street, mostly because they're just in dire need of warm bodies because of the controller firing by Reagan. So they were just normally they'll come through some sort of tech school, a program in college, CTS, or the military. And it's very hard to find a bid where you can bid and test and not have any of that kind of background. But at the time, I had 6 years in college, and I was working in a bike shop, and went down, took the civil service exam, and like a couple weeks later, they called up and said, well, actually, I was in the southern region. I had applied in there, and but the Western Pacific, which was really hurting for bodies, called up and said, "Hey, if you want to go to the academy, we'll send you." Um, which is funny because I had been in that area in Huntington Beach and Edwards Air Force Base and San Jose, and went to high school at Edwards Air Force Base before I came out to the East Coast and went to college. So I was like, I wasn't one of the ones fooled by LA Center, not realizing it was nowhere near Los Angeles, but
Yeah.
up in Palmdale in the high desert. I was like, I loved that. That was my motorcycle shop was up there, and all the all the single track and all of the dry lake beds, and I was ready to go.
Yeah, and we were actually just talking about that because I was telling Ian a lot of air traffic control or air route traffic control centers or just centers aren't anywhere near the cities they're named after. Some are, but some aren't. But like Los Angeles Center, I looked it up. I'm like, well, that's
Yeah,
clear up in Palm. That's like it's probably an hour away from Los Angeles.
yeah. It's about exactly an hour, and it's really sort of a security thing. You know, they wanted um, certain approach controls and centers to sort of be more remotely located. Um, so why they called it Los Angeles Center instead of Palmdale Center, I don't know, but they sort of picked the nearby big cities for them all.
Yeah.
San Francisco, Oakland Center is really in Hawthorne, and Albuquerque Center is pretty much in Albuquerque, but really there's nothing else out there anyway. So,
Right.
but
So when you said academy, you d- you don't have to have it. Do you have to have a degree to be an air traffic controller? I didn't think you did.
you do not.
You do not. That's what I thought.
So
And then to go to
yeah,
the academy, that's Oklahoma City, correct?
yeah, Oklahoma City, the academy. It's almost like you could say that with air quotes because until recently, it was simply a screening process. Their goal was to wash out half of the people that went there. And by that, they figured the ones that made it through would have a chance at checking out somewhere. And I don't know, back and forth, they kind of decided that really wasn't the best way to go about it. So the CTS programs and some of the colleges have where you actually can get a degree in air traffic operations or air traffic control. Really do a lot better job preparing you, at least for the academy. And then at the academy, you're actually, while you're still basically going through some sort of matriculation screening process, it was a little more geared to like, this is what you're really going to be doing. When we went through it, we did manual non-radar problems, which really hadn't been in use except for oceanic for
Right.
years,
Is
and
that like
they
the
only
little
did it
shrimp
that
boats?
way. Yeah, well, we didn't even have shrimp boats, that's radar.
Oh.
talking non-radar,
Okay.
a big rack of strips, and you have every aircraft has its own progress strip, and you write down everything about it on there, and it's all done in your mind and on the flight progress strips. So
That's crazy.
it was really just a method of trying to can you talk? Can you respond? Can you write? Can you react? And if you can't, then see you later. But it was only like about 3.5, 4 months. Really, they wanted you to go through there, then they figure out where they put you, and then they send you off to your facility where you did your real training. Everything, even
Yeah.
now, is on the job training. But
So did they give you a choice of facilities? Did they say pick 3 and then in reality you get none of those?
exactly.
That's what I thought.
You've heard the rumors. So it depends on your status and their status and who's hiring and what's. It's kind of different that way. Like I was picked up by the Western Pacific, which was like Washington Center and Oakland Center, basically.
Mm.
And so everybody had their dream sheet. I wanted to go to Santa Barbara Tower or Santa Monica Tower or uh, n- Oakland Tower or something like that, or Sacramento was what it was.
Yeah.
And I walk in there, and the guy just looks at my sheet, throws it away, and says, "You want to go to LA Center or Oakland Center?" I said, LA Center." Um,
It's like a
so
typical government thing. Like,
yeah,
my dad was in the Air Force in the late '60s, and they said, "Pick 3 places you wanna go." He goes, "I didn't get any of those 3 places." Nobody got any of the places that they wanted to
No.
go. It's always,
yeah,
"You're
I
gonna
don't know.
go here."
I don't know why they even bother. It's staffing. This facility, you go there, and they were reluctant to put anybody out of the academy right into a approach control or a busy tower unless you had some kind of military or background experience.
I'm
Yeah.
surprised that they
Um,
sent you to LA then, like that.
well, LA, it's different. I mean, well, all the centers are like that, but you sort of have the ability to learn the system and learn air traffic and then do everything on the job by working through. We have like the manual or sort of the assistant controller position and the flight data position, and then eventually you check out on your radar scopes. Whereas some places like SoCal approach, you you better hit the ground running. It's not necessarily harder radar. It's very, very, very specialized, though, very proceduralized. You need to sort of already have a handle on what you're going to say because you got to sit down there and do this, and you got to be quick about it. So
Yeah.
it's a different kind of world. But
Yeah.
I don't know when I was hired, it was like they were testing off the street and taking people, and they still do that, but it's rare that if you go to usajobs.gov that you'll ever see any of the bids saying that you can just come in off the street. You have to go through CTS or have prior military, but they still do them. They still have them.
I heard at
And
one point that if you had a private pilot's license, like, if they took you off the street, you got graded in a sense or got points. That if
yeah,
you had a private pilot license, that was worth something. If you had an instrument rating, that was worth something, and
yeah,
that helped.
exactly,
Is that still the
exactly, yeah,
case?
yeah, it did. So they would test people out of the colleges, out of the military, off the street, and have this big pool of applicants. And then every time they were going to put an input into the academy, everybody, all the facilities that wanted somebody would say, I need 3 people, I need 5 people, I need whatever," and they would go to this pool and just go down the list. The top score, and keep on going down, keep on going down. So if you didn't get, say, a perfect score on your exam, um, then having military experience, having private pilot's license, having instrument license, that could boost your score tremendously. So even though you might have got a 90 and they weren't going to take anybody below a 95, if you had these ratings, you were safe. So you would get
Yeah,
picked up.
yeah.
Yeah.
If a person goes to one of the universities that has an ATC course, are there any advantages to that versus just getting a degree in something non-aviation related? Does it help you at the quote academy? get through it
Yeah,
quicker, or does it?
it does, but you don't necessarily have to get the degree in air traffic control. But if you take the courses and get a degree, so getting a 4-year degree is sort of like part of the requirements, and it's a combination of 4-year degree or work experience or other things like that. So you get your degree, but you also have taken these courses, and maybe you end up getting a business degree instead of a aviation degree. But still, you've taken the courses, and then you're usually able to then take the test and get into the pool.
Okay.
So you don't have to have it doesn't have to be your major, but it helps if you could go to a school that offers the program, and then you can take the courses and then take the test. So
Yeah, and with each, I mean, there's center controllers, there's approach, tower, ground. Are there different, and with the flying side, I mean, there's private, instrument, commercial, there's different levels. You have to take a written test and a practical for each one. Is it the same way with ATC with the different positions?
sort of each facility has positions that you would have to check out in, and essentially they are sort of a flight data type position, a manual or handoff type position, an assistant position, and then a radar position.
Okay.
Of course, some towers don't have that because they don't have radar, or some
Right.
approach controls might be like smaller and don't really have assistance. It's just like flight data, and you're working the scope. But so it depends on what facility you go to, but you get facility rated. So you go to SoCal Tracon and you get facility rated, but that doesn't mean you can just walk into NorCal or LA Center and start working. You would have to still go through their training program. Now, granted, it would be a lot easier, and they would make exceptions for your experience, and basically they would probably just check you off of the manual and assistant sides in an instant and basically start training you on the radar scope.
Okay.
Um, but it's still like it's a big thing of it is the airspace. You have to be an expert in your airspace. You have to know the procedures because not knowing just the departures and arrivals and routes and fixes, we also have a big part of it is the surrounding facilities and surrounding sectors, and every one of them has some sort of agreement, some sort of letter of agreement or facility operations agreement. I have to give this guy to you over this fix at this block of altitudes.
Oh
And
yeah.
if I don't do that, I have to call you up and ask for forgiveness or
Yeah.
I break something else.
And in
Um,
the pilot world, we that drives us nuts because we deal with Indy Center. We'll be
yeah,
125 miles out, and we have to cross a fix at like
right.
12,000 feet. It's like, why do we have to go so low this far out? It's a letter of agreement.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Albuquerque does that to us all the time because of the way they get flow into Albuquerque into Phoenix, and we cross basically the Colorado River or just past it really at 25,000 feet, and you have no choice in the matter really unless it's the middle of the night or something. And really, that's kind of going away. If you've seen some of the newer fixes and newer routes and have approaches and descend via clearances and climb via SIDS, they've been working with the airlines especially to try to give them what they want as far as we want to start down here, top of descent 410, and we want to get down to here and start the approach. We don't
Right.
want to have to bust our ass down, then slow down to 250 knots, then stay level for 100 miles and do it all over again. And they want to just descend, hit their marks, and check their speed. And air traffic controllers don't know how those planes fly. I mean, a controller will ask the impossible all the time. Slow down and descend fast as you can. Go
Mhm.
fast and keep climbing. And the pilots just got to drive them nuts. Because especially some of the aircraft, they're right on the limits of what they can do as far as what's indicated speeds they can slow to or speed up to, and what climb rate they can change. Every time.
Right, and I'm just sitting here with a grin on my face because, like, what he's saying, it's like, I know exactly what he's saying
Yeah.
'cause I've been on the other end of that.
Oh yeah, and most controllers, especially the ones that have little experience, have no concept about how Mach speed changes as they climb, how indicated airspeed is, the parameters sort of get narrower and narrower. The aircraft can't perform outside these things at certain altitudes and certain speeds.
Yeah, or they'll give us a speed, they'll say, "Maintain 300 knots." Well, this airplane can only do
Right.
290,
Yeah,
and then we tell them that this airplane can only do 290. Okay, well, just give us
Well,
290
so
then.
yeah,
in
yeah.
the automotive world that I came from, we have a lot of parts people that have 0 automotive experience. So how many people in an ATC setting have any kind of aircraft experience? Like,
That's surprisingly very little. Like you said, these guys have gone through the academy from the school or from the military even, but they never touched a plane. They've
yeah,
worked the radar scope. They know the procedures. They know the airspace. They know what they have to do, but they
right,
couldn't even, especially unless you never worked those guys that don't work in towers have been underground at the approach control or the center of their whole lives. We used to joke about it. They would say, what's a Cessna Caravan look like? Oh, it looks like a little green slash. Looks like a little
They all
bigger.
do.
Looks like a little green dot.
yeah.
So
So not many are actual pilots themselves.
there are more and more, but it's probably rare that every crew doesn't have one. There's usually maybe a couple per area or something like that, and they're aware of that too because when there are urgent situations, emergencies, or things, they're looking
Right.
at who's got any experience with a twin engine aircraft or a Cessna 172, and
Yeah.
because that can really help out quite a bit. But as far as talking to a pilot and we're telling you what we need you to do for our letters of agreement and our traffic flows and our sequencing, and it's like a big puzzle. We get 4 streams coming together and we need to give SoCal one stream at 250 knots down at 10,000 feet.
Tet
That's your goal.
Tetris. It's a
Yeah, exactly,
never-ending game
exactly.
of Tetris.
It is.
And those little dots never stop, do they?
Yeah, it's funny that way. That's why so many people like to sort of move up and out, get into maybe another position where they can actually get some sort of satisfaction for their accomplishments. Because if you work the boards, after a while, you start thinking like, damn, they just never stop
Right.
coming. You think I took care of all that, and like, oh, here comes the next wave. So
Yeah. So then with ATC, as far as the education, the academy, what are some other requirements, as far as medicals and stuff like that?
well, the medical is an airman's medical exam, and it's doesn't really exactly equate to a like pilots will have like a student pilot, instructor
Or second, third?
pilot. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, first, second, third, or something. I'd say the FAA is probably somewhere around the second level medical, but it is completely, even though it's done by a flight surgeon and it's called the Airman's Medical Certificate, it's really unique to air traffic control as far as their hearing test, their vision test. So many of these things that they have to score certain values on, either corrected or not corrected, and or if they don't, like say they have diabetes or if they have poor vision or something like that, they need to either have it corrected to a certain extent or they need to go to an outside doctor on their own dime usually and get some kind of a certificate saying like he can perform these tasks. And I've even had them where they had the soup. I always had a problem in one ear of a little hearing loss, and it wasn't bad, but they would always make my supervisor come up behind me and talk, and they'd ask, "Did you hear him?" And that was their test. Like, okay, I'll sign him off for another year. But
So
just kind
what
of
about age requirements? Isn't there a
gauge, yeah. you have to be through the academy before you turn 31, basically.
Oh,
Yeah.
31.
Yeah.
Okay. I was thinking 35. Okay.
31.
Did
Yeah.
Okay, and this question, Ian, do you wanna ask it? Are there
Oh, you go ahead. Which one are you looking up?
um no, that one, are there any wa can you get a waiver for the ages if you're over 31, do
The
they let anybody through ever?
the reason this
Or
is
is it
on there is because I joined VatSim when Flight Sim came out, and so I've gotten used to that and stuff, and I'm like, well, that would be a cool job. So I started looking into it, and I'm all like, that's something I could probably do to get into aviation. And then I saw that, and I was like, ah, that sucks.
I don't
And
I don't think there is any way to do it other than maybe within a few months or within that 31st year. Anything
not
outside of that,
7 years later.
no. But there are other ways to go into the program where you wouldn't be able to be an air traffic controller, but there
Just like a
are
support job.
yeah, it would be like a flight data specialist or a tech ops specialist or a fast specialist. These guys basically who work with all of the airspace requirements, and they do all of the computer stuff, and they do all the anybody who might handle flight data between facilities or work on computers. Um, from the sock and things like that. So, and because a lot of controllers will do that after they've been on the boards and beat their brains out for a while, they'll go take a staff job and work in airspace and procedures or maybe traffic management or somewhere because it gives them a chance to sort of take a little breath of fresh air and do something else. And
How would somebody find those jobs? Just be lucky and find a listing,
they're
or
all they're all on. What is it, usajobs.gov?
okay, so they're all federal.
Yeah, yeah, they're all federal. Well,
Okay.
that's not true. They're mostly federal, but there are several contractor jobs that you can get also. There's always a couple of Lockheed Martin guys with the FAST group. That's like our airspace and procedures gurus, and
Mhm.
there's there's actually a whole training cadre that work as a contractor. I think they're some other company that's hired through Lockheed Martin that it contracts to the FAA. People that work in the Oklahoma City and up at the tech center in Atlantic City. A lot of them are from IBM. Well, not anymore, but Lockheed Martin and what's the other one? I can't think of the name of it, but a number of contractors that work for the FAA that or have a number of jobs there. None of them will be traffic related, but it'll
Right.
all be support specialists and a lot of interesting things that way. But
Yeah.
So what do you say, like, to somebody that is going through or wants to be an air traffic controller, like, based on your experience? Like, in the aviation industry in general, it's very cyclical. Good economy, everything's great, but if the economy gets bad or there's something like what we all dealt with in the last year,
yeah,
people start losing jobs.
well, if they were able to take those courses at a at a college, that would give them the opportunity to take the controller exam, the test.
Mm.
It's like a civil service exam, really. And if you look on usajobs.gov, every time you'll see constant bids out for air traffic controllers going to this center, this tower, this approach, and um, most of the time they're either looking for people with experience, which kind of cuts newbies out, but
Mhm.
otherwise people who have been able to go through those programs and qualify and take that test. And rare, like I said, anymore, rare is it that you can go and take the test cold. Um, it it still happens, but that maybe once a year there'll be a bid out where you can go and test and get accepted, and if you score well enough, actually get an invite to Oklahoma City.
Okay. So how would
Without
you rate your career, like, as far as job stability, security, or just or ATC as a whole? Would you on a scale of 1 to 10, would you say it's like a 10? Or I mean, there's obviously probably a chance of layoffs and stuff like that. But how would you?
Actually, there was very little chance of layoffs, um, unless you're stuck in some tower that's downsizing and going, contractor or something. But even e- even when they had furloughs due to basically it was just due to budget issues with Congress. You
Mhm.
never you basically you got like we spread it around. You'd have like an extra day on the beach or something, and half the
That's not
time
too
you get
bad.
the money back for it in a few paychecks. It wasn't bad at all.
Yeah.
And you really have to screw up badly to get fired. You can
Mhm.
get fired by not making it through the training program because you're sort of career conditional for the first 2 or 3 years, I think. Basically, they can say like you're not cutting the mustard and just fire you. But even then, they rarely do that. They usually take that investment and say, "Well, we'll send them to such and such a facility." They're a lot slower, they're a lot lower grade, and they can sort of, people have done well have come back up through that, and they've gotten a lot of experience that way because now they went to some little tower, and then they finally got, saw the light and figured it all
Yeah,
out,
thanks,
and
Rick.
then worked their way back up, and next thing you know, the guy's your supervisor. So,
Hey, that's aviation. That happens. It's
yeah,
like be
but
nice to
yeah,
your first officer because someday he might be your boss.
Tim, I
exactly,
think what
exactly.
he's saying is he can use you as a lawn dart as long as he doesn't let you hit anybody else.
That's
Basically, yeah.
exactly what he said. And he won't lose his job, but he's retired, so he's safe anyway.
Right?
Oh, yeah, yeah. I mean, if you if you have a separation loss, if you have an incident like that, an operational deviation, it's it's all it's not going to cost you your job unless you are in the career conditional part of the equation. But as far as anybody who's fully certified, it's not going to be unless they do it like day on a daily basis. But
Right.
yeah,
I have to imagine it's like anything else where everybody has a bad day, and I'm sure those are the days that are the most stressful when you know you made a mistake and people's lives were on the line. I'm sure the pilots have the
Mhm.
same thing.
well,
Um,
they did an interesting thing. They used to be very very draconian, where you had a deal and they would sit you down and they would or stand you up really and read you the riot act and you know, give you all kinds of shit and maybe time on the beach and just it was you didn't want to do it. It was basically
right.
scare tactics almost. But they kind of went away from that. A because they realized their staffing was so poor that they were asking people to do way too much.
Yeah.
You don't want to really hear that though, I guess. But also NASA created a program about how you could just sort of self identify your failings. You would say, "I had a," yeah, they got rid of. They used to have a snitch. It was a little computer program. It would check everything, and if it detected that there was a loss of separation, it would go off, and they would come down there, and they'd stand over you and say, "What the hell did you do?" And if it was bad enough, they'd yank you off the position and send you upstairs, and you'd have to start writing things down. And they don't do that anymore. Now it's more like if there's an issue, they might give you a break and try to figure things out. But really, you could just go to the computer and fill out a report and say this happened and this happened, and they were more interested in the people talking about what led up to it and what they did and what might have caused it, and it was giving them so much more valuable information as far as I don't know everything from fatigue to procedures to training levels and all this stuff that they said just do this and you won't get anything, nothing will come of it. So,
Yeah.
and it's sort of a much better environment that way too.
Letting you learn from it
Yeah.
instead of yelling at you about it.
Yeah, really.
So another thing, speaking of learning, one thing that when I was learning to fly, and the first time I had to fly to a controlled airport or talk to ATC, I hated it. I was nervous, the anxiety, and I think it's every single pilot.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's one thing I want to get from this is I'm hoping somebody that's a new pilot or student pilot or a new private pilot listens to this. It's like, oh, that's me. He's talking about me. What do you say to somebody that is nervous about talking to air traffic control?
Start off slow. We get so many of the flight schools out of Phoenix, out of San Diego. They would come through and they would head out in the desert, and it was just LA Center. Once all the approach controls faded away, it was just us and Class E airspace and um, a little Class G thrown in for good measure, and nothing else going on. Come on out and ask for advisories, do your cross country, and it was a lot more slow paced. And once you got away from all the Class Charlies and Class Bravos, and you give them a chance to ask for what's my ground speed, or how's my heading look, can I do this approach in VFR conditions, and 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 it was a lot more comfortable to just talk. Sometimes they would chat a little too much, but they would.
Yeah, little chatty
Yeah,
Cathy's.
don't go into Los Angeles on your first cross country ride. They wouldn't even let you in. They actually you can't be a student pilot in there. But don't go into Orange County on your first day. And you just don't know how things work. You don't know all the procedures. That's what's so great about PilotEdge. Hey, I wanna fly into
Yeah.
Orange County. Well, hell, I can do it on PilotEdge for like a couple weeks here, and then by the time they actually do it in real life, I've had a number of people, that just chatting on their servers saying, like, it was exactly how it worked, it was just, it was
Yeah, and that's good to hear, because when I did my training 25 years
yeah.
ago, we didn't have any of
Nah.
this stuff. It was I took a piece of paper that had everything written out, and I would just fill in the
Mm.
blanks, and I would just read the little piece of paper as I was flying along, pushing the button, and, like, gotta watch altitude and everything else also, and it was nerve-wracking,
Yo.
but the technology now is, I think is a
Oh,
fantastic
yeah.
help because guys can go on liveatc.net, they can listen to, air traffic control
Yeah.
communication, they can do PilotEdge, VatSim, and practice all this stuff, then they go out in the actual airplane and
Well,
do it, and they
even
prove it all.
YouTube, how many times you wanna say,
Right.
"How do I work the pattern?" or "How do I do this?" They can find, probably somebody on YouTube that's flying their actual equipment in a pattern that's almost identical, if not the same as the one they're gonna go fly around in, and
That's exactly how I've learned anything, and I think I haven't been on PilotEdge, for no other reason than I found VatSim first, and, um, I think I spent 2 or 3 weeks just logging in and sitting at, McCarran or LAX and listening to everybody,
yeah.
and, I watched every YouTube video I could find, and I think one of those ones was the first video of Tim's I found,
Mm.
um, and I'm still nervous every time I do it, and I have one of those little cheat sheets just like and
Yeah.
it's not real for me, so if
Well,
I screw up
if you wanna feel nervous, get a PilotEdge account and try talking to them, because you will do that in the sim, and you'll think your life is on the line. I mean, it is so realistic
yeah,
compared to VatSim, which is just sort of hit or miss. I mean, some of the guys are really good. Other guys, it's kind of a this is my first time I'm playing around, but on PilotEdge, it is eerily accurate, and they'll let you know too if you're not performing correctly.
oh,
So
they've let me know a couple times. I think my first time I ever got, the courage to actually talk to ATC on there, I left Charlotte, and I think before I took off, I made 3 mistakes, and I apologized to the guy, and, he was very graceful about it, but he let me know, and we were the only 2 at that airport, so he corrected me and stuff, but very politely, and, yeah, but it definitely makes you humble for sure, and, I studied a little bit before I did my 2nd flight.
yeah, well,
And
it's so much better to do that on the to actually get in the air on a cross country and start making those
Right,
mistakes, and because then it can have a lot more serious consequences. Even
absolutely.
I'm sure you've heard a number of the pissed off ATC or pilot tapes on
Yeah,
YouTube
I
and
listen to
the
them all
others,
the time.
and 'cause it can be very frustrating. It's not like you can just pause the system and say like, okay, let's try this again.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
a little
you
different.
don't know.
and that's one thing I've heard with
Sorry, I
oh,
was
go
gonna say,
ahead.
the controller, depending on the staffing and depending on what's going on, you don't know just because there's nobody talking. He might be doing 6 or 7 other things. He may be responsible for typing in flight plans. He may have to call facilities. We have our headsets plugged in, but we have a whole array of communications buttons. So besides the frequency that we have all keyed up, ready to go, We have buttons that we can hit to call all the sectors around us. We have buttons that we hit to call the approaches and facilities around us. And you might be talking to SoCal and coordinating something, and you might be talking to flight data and trying to get some flight plan put in. And somebody comes over the border from Albuquerque and says, November 123, the Cessna 172 at 6,500. We're about 25. Make that 26 miles west, or actually east of. By that time, you were like ready to just shoot him out of the sky.
Rip the headset off and go home.
But so, yes, check in and say like November 123 request, and then when you have the guy's attention, work in the frequency, the sector.
Tim and I were talking about that earlier.
That was one of the questions I had here at
Oh,
the
sorry.
end,
No, it's
and
all
I'm
right.
gonna go ahead and mark that off now.
Well, yeah,
And that was one I had, like, a lot of times when I'm flying, like, talking to center, like, say, Atlanta Center, I have a request, I'll just say November 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
it,
and I just spit out
yeah,
the
it depends.
request.
It
I don't
depends
say
on the
request.
request, and it depends on your situation. If they got radar on you, you're IFR, you're here, then they're probably expecting you to maybe ask for a reroute or a descent or an approach or whatever. So yeah, hey, request a pilot's discretion descent, or request direct such and such.
Yeah.
That's different. But a guy who you don't even have a tag on, other than there might be a little V floating around out there, may or may not be with a mode C even. You need to find out where he is, what he is, how fast he's going. You have to put in this
Mhm.
flight plan. Basically, it's in a very abbreviated, but start a track, give him a code, do all this other stuff. It's a lot different than the guy who's up and
Yeah.
radar and you know exactly who he is and where he's going and all this other stuff.
That
And
was
also,
another.
Yeah, and
sorry.
I've had instances where I've done it both ways, where I've just spit it out, and they'll come back and say, "Oh, I was on the landline, say
Yeah.
again." Like, well, I just spit it out, now I gotta do it
Yeah.
again. Um, so that was kinda my question. Better to say tell number then
I
request, let them come back, or just spit it out, but it sounds like option A is
I
better
like to
than
like give them, if
just
you can
spit it out.
give them the pertinent information very briefly, that's always good. November 123
Yeah.
request a descent. If it's something like that, you wouldn't want to say request and then say
Yeah,
like, can
it's
we start
short.
down now? But and depends on your
Yeah.
situation too. If you're talking to ground, you probably don't have to say request. They know you want to taxi or something, or departures. There's very few little things they can do. Can we get a turn on course? Can we get higher? Just ask. Hey, when can we expect higher? Or when can we get direct seal beach? Um, but sort of the further afield you get, the less chance the guy knows what you probably want to do. So maybe you have to say it very briefly, or just say, "I've got a request when you're ready." So especially when you're not under radar contact and you're telling them everything about you from
Yeah,
your
and I'm always under radar. I don't think I even remember how to fly VFR anymore. VFR
yeah.
scares me. I
And see,
just
I
don't.
almost in the sim, anyways. I always fly VFR, so
Yeah. Well, that's a
IFR
big
scares
difference.
me more.
If you leave with advisories, you're essentially getting the same treatment as IFR. You're not getting the separation necessarily, but they have a tag on you. They have your call sign. They have your type aircraft. They have essentially they have your route of flight, and they know how fast you're going and what altitude you're going to be at. So it's a big difference.
Yeah.
Um,
And I think
as a
that's one thing when you're learning to fly, or you've got a private pilot license, and you're flying from point A to point B, guys will, and I was guilty of this too. I didn't wanna talk to ATC. I was terrified of them. I would go around an airspace or above an airspace, and now I hear guys ask that question, like, "Where should I go to go around this, or should I talk to them?" Like, no. Fly the route you
well,
wanna fly and talk to them. They're not gonna hurt you. If they're too busy and can't talk to you, they'll tell you, "We're too busy right now."
Well, you take a look at places like Phoenix and LA and others like that, and they have those VFR flyways, and basically they're saying like, "Here, fly this and stay the hell out of my airspace
Mhm.
and don't talk to me."
Yeah.
Or then maybe there's a transition route too. It's like, okay, you can talk to me, but tell me you're doing this, and then we can ignore you.
Yeah.
Um, so you can see that the busier the airspace is, especially the Class Bravos, that either your IFR and they have your flight plan and they know exactly what you're going to do, and basically you're going to do what they tell you to do, or your VFR and you're going to stay the hell out of the way, or you really know what you're doing. So, you know,
Yeah.
I think it all comes down to your comfort level. After you've flown into Orange County a dozen times,
Hmm.
you know what to expect. You know how to identify yourself and tell them where you are, and you know what the tower's going to tell you to do, or the approach control is going to tell you to do. It's so much easier. But that first time, yeah, it's going to be terrifying regardless,
Yeah, and I
because
think that's what people need to do. The people that are asking about, "Where's this airspace? Should I go above it? Should I go around it?" No, go through it. Jump in feet first and just go. The more you do it, the easier it gets, and looking back on it, with my experience, I was terrified of it back then when I only had a couple 100 hours. Fast forward to now, I've got over 7,000.
mm,
I'm more worried about flying into an uncontrolled airport than I am talking to LAX. Because everything is
it,
such a well-oiled machine versus you go to an uncontrolled airport, you don't know who's doing what or going where, and it's
oh yeah,
less structured, so I prefer talking to ATC and going into a towered airport than uncontrolled, and that's my advice to anybody listening to this. Get your feet wet, just go. The more you do it, the easier it gets, and I think it's the fear of the unknown and not knowing what to expect that makes people nervous, but once you have it down and do it enough, it's just as easy as starting the
For
airplane, it becomes
for
second
me, I
nature.
feel like I'm always in the
yeah.
way, you know? I'm leaving in my area.
No, that's what they're
Yeah,
there for, you
and that's
know?
what Tim told me
Mhm.
too.
So and and some controllers will make you feel like you're in the way, but that's just because they're probably treading water,
Yeah,
and so but that's why they're there. The safe, expeditious handling of flight traffic and of air traffic. They much would rather, if you're going to be traffic for somebody, know who you are, what you're doing.
yeah,
Um, So there were cases where VFRs were just verboten, and like if we had something special going on, maybe like a PGA tournament at Palm Springs or something up in Vegas, they would have reservation numbers and they would have, terminate all the VFRs, put them all on this frequency, tell them all to fly this route, and it was a big drastic change. But day to day, especially if you pick your times right, don't go during the morning rush, or
Right.
hey,
right.
if you can avoid it, take a look at the traffic flows and figure out, when's the best time to go in there and talk to that guy at SoCal. I don't know.
Yeah, and just be familiar with the area too.
Yeah,
That's what I like to tell people. Be familiar with the area, the intersections, because they might
Oh
I mean,
yeah,
if you're VFR, chances are they're not, but even the IFR guys that are maybe newer
yeah.
know the intersections, like, if you're gonna be expecting to get an approach, know the waypoints on that approach. So when they give you a fix, you're not thinking to yourself, "What is it?"
Well,
Versus you just
yeah.
read them and you're like, "Oh, that's that. I know where that's at. That's on the final approach course."
Another helpful thing that pilots, you can hear the airline pilots do all the time. And it's they have to figure out where it is. Does it tie into their route? How do I, can I easily put it in the FMS and go direct to this fix? Just immediately, you get cleared some fix you're not prepared for, just say, "Request initial heading." That
Right.
way you can
oh,
turn
there
the
you go.
heading bug to that heading and then start worrying about, "Okay, where do I get Pomona? It's not on my route of flight. Oh, you said Pomona Daggett. Okay, I see where that ties in." And then they otherwise, I've had trainees wonder why the guy's still flying on the departure towards Catalina, and I turned him direct Pomona like 10 miles ago. I said, "He doesn't know where the hell Pomona is. You should have
Yeah.
told him
He's
which way to go."
he's
And
looking for it, and he's
yeah,
afraid to ask.
yeah,
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 yeah, that's exactly it.
And what
I've
I
done it.
do, I don't look on a chart. I'll just if they give me an intersection, if I don't know it and it's not on my route, "Can you spell it?" Right away, "Can you spell it?"
yeah, yeah,
It saves time, it saves the controller's grief of, "Where's this guy going? I gave him direct to that fix, he's not going."
mhm.
I don't even try to look for it, I just spell it.
Um,
Yeah,
I've
So
I flew, like, I don't know, probably 100 miles west one time when I was supposed to be going north because I didn't know what the hell they were talking about. I was afraid to ask him, and the guy just turned me around and sent me right back to where I came from, and then I went north. I'm like, well, that added about an hour to my trip. So,
Yeah, that was always a big trainee item. Once they've done something like busted an altitude or made a wrong turn or didn't make a turn, the trainee's first reaction is to say, "What are you doing?" Or, "You were supposed to do this," or something like that. Like, that's useless information. You know,
right.
worry about finding out who screwed up later on. For now, the first thing out of your mouth better be, "What's the safe altitude?" Descend them back down, keep them climbing, turn them, whatever the case may be. Give them that heading, give them that altitude. And then when you have a chance, go back and figure out, was it something I said? Was it something you didn't understand? Did the tower clear you something different than we showed? Happens
One
all the
I've heard
time.
one I've heard before is November 1, 2, 3, 4. Say heading. I'm like, uh-oh. I was supposed to be doing something and I messed up.
What you do is say present heading. So,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. It's
I'm
funny. So,
curious also, what's the you Tim tells me that you're a controller on PilotEdge.
no, I'm a pilot on PilotEdge.
Oh, okay. So you just
Oh,
use
I
PilotEdge.
actually, I did give them an application, but they're not really. They hired a couple people about then, and I'm just sort of waiting around. I'm not sure if they want someone like me, as far as I don't want to work full time, and their
Right.
schedule is a little geared to that. But you know, I enjoy my retirement, so I'd rather do it
Understand.
bits and pieces. So.
So they're actually like, they actually have people that are employees.
Yeah, yeah,
oh, they do?
PilotEdge is different. It's they're very highly trained. They have them, they work at home on their own computers, but they have, very detailed information that they have to check out on, and their training is a lot more rigorous. So I mean, it's big difference between PilotEdge and say VatSim or some of those other programs. Mostly also because they have clients. These people pay them a lot of money to train their pilots, so their pilots can practice approaches and practice routes and practice phraseology, and so they're good. I mean, um, they I'm very impressed with their knowledge. It's much better than your average controller's knowledge.
Yeah.
They're all and most of them are, I think almost all of them are either current or former controllers, familiar with the airspace out there. As you see, PilotEdge is just in the West. But
Yeah, and that was honestly so I'm from the Midwest, so they didn't cover my area and I like flying local, so that was the probably the only reason that I chose VatSim over PilotEdge when I was looking.
yeah, for sure.
Um, but
And
I've learned more about PilotEdge too.
What's
that's
that?
one thing that gets me with PilotEdge and all these other things. Like real controllers, when they're not being controllers, will go and do PilotEdge. I can go fly all day, come home and play Flight Simulator, and I just keep going. It's not an addiction, but it's like it gets in your
I've
bloodstream
seen
and
how
you
much
can't
you're
get it
on. It
out.
is an addiction, Tim.
I think it is. Yeah.
It's a passion. Passion and addiction are two different things.
They mean the same thing.
Oh, they do, but one sounds a lot better than the other.
Right.
Yeah.
So I have a few more just quick questions, real world questions. When ATC says something like November 1, 2, 3, expedite descent to 3,000. If
Yeah.
I'm already doing 1,500 feet a minute, what do they want? Because a lot of times we'll ask, and it's like, "Oh, just expedite." Well, what is
They
that?
want they want 6,000 feet a minute. They want, like I said, these guys don't know how aircraft work necessarily. They're controllers. They learn their procedures. They can separate traffic, hopefully. They if they're saying expedite all the time, maybe you gotta start wondering, do they know how to separate aircraft? Ideally, you use vectors, you use crossing restrictions, you monitor the situation and it's not a factor, but when you're constantly going back to the plan and saying expedite over and over and over again, something's wrong. I mean, it happens a lot when, say, there's weather out, but otherwise, maybe this guy's needs a little more experience. But yeah, I mean, everybody says expedite because they don't necessarily know. And the more experience you have, that you start to realize which aircraft will perform how they will perform. So, but
Right.
especially younger guys, expedite. He basically means as fast as you possibly can, and he doesn't realize that basically you're already doing that. So I
Yeah.
can give you a
So we'll
1,700 feet
descend,
a minute, but
yeah, like we'll descend at 1,500 feet a minute normally.
yeah.
There's times where we'll go a little slower. Like if we're getting close to 10,000, we want to go fast because we can do about 360 knots
Well, what you should
higher.
do, if you start down and they say expedite, you say, "How about 1,500 feet a minute?" And they say, "Okay, that'll be good." I guarantee you, probably 90% of the time they'll say, "Okay, that's perfect. That'll be fine." So
Yeah. I'll try that.
don't tell them
Like
you're already doing it, but
how's 1,000 feet per minute sound? Because
yeah,
then I can stay
exactly.
high and keep my
A
true
1,000
airspeed
feet,
up.
okay. Oh, yeah, that'll be fine. So, and that's the thing too with the radar. We see descent rates by just the mode C changing. We have
Mhm.
basically two numbers, the assigned altitude and the current reported altitude. And so there's nothing that really says exactly how fast your descent rate is. It's just you can see the numbers ticking by. And also, while approach control gets a little more quicker updates in the center, they don't get an update for every 6 seconds now. Used to be every 12 seconds even.
Yeah,
So
now at the ADSB, they're getting it every second, I believe.
yeah,
Yeah.
at the airports and that are supporting it. So I mean, as this becomes system wide, the satellite and ADSB and those systems will really vastly help. All those routes will be, just dialed in. The separation standards will shrink. You'll be able to just be cleared to descend via, and they won't have to touch you again.
Yeah. Yeah, and
That's
that
the
makes it
ultimate
easy.
goal.
I love getting like, having a long arrival and
Mhm.
hearing cleared to descend via the, whatever arrival. Because then you just set in the bottom altitude, press VNAV, and just let that thing go. And
Yeah,
then that reduces they don't have to give us all these altitude restrictions. It's so much easier.
yeah. I mean, that's just you used to never get that. You would come across
Right.
the into the sector, and they would start you down, and they would adjust your speed based on the other traffic coming together over the same point, and so they would slow you down or speed you up, and it was like that. You couldn't perform any better. I remember one of the supervisors working, and he was starting to struggle a bit with the traffic flows coming together, and he says Southwest 236. Descend and maintain flight level 240, maintain 320 knots or greater when able. And the South was just like, "Oh, we'd like to hang it up here for a bit. It's a little bumpy, and we're not sure if we want to speed up." And he goes, "Southwest 236, make it your speed or make it your heading."
Mm.
And which would have been like a 90-degree right turn for him. So he goes like, "All right, we're going fast," and just kept going. So
Huh.
but, I mean, the Southwest, that's another issue too. When there's weather, things just get thrown out the window,
Window. Yeah.
you can't go fast in turbulence, you can't fly certain routes with the buildups and, you know, towering cumulus, things like that. They're gonna go
Right.
where they gotta go, so that's when things really start getting interesting. Mm,
Yeah. Yeah, another quick question has to do with, phraseology. I hear guys, they'll say November 1, 2, 3, 4 is with you,
yeah,
3,000 feet, and that drives me absolutely bonkers. They know they're with you.
yeah,
You're talking to them,
obviously,
you're saying your tail number, it's like, don't say that. But that and then when they say checking in, "Oh,
checking in,
isn't
yeah.
that the thing you're doing right now anyway?"
Yeah, it's just lingo, and you hear it, you repeat it. But yeah, really, they want you to say your altitude and your assigned altitude. And you really don't even have to say your current altitude if you're in the same facility. It's the first sector in any facility that wants to basically verify your mode C's reporting correctly. So you
So
check
you don't
on with
even have
departure, you say altitude and assigned altitude.
you don't even need to give them your position?
Oh, never, never. I mean, if it's a non-radar tower, obviously you do.
Yeah.
Or if you were not identified, if you're just a VFR that wants to pick up your IFR or just to ask for advisories, you
But once they
obviously have.
say they have radar contact, you're good.
Yeah, I mean, there are a few cases where they use non-radar procedures. We still did for a long time. I think they still might be doing it between Mazatlan Center, south of the border, and the U.S. So they would check in and they would give a position report. Roger, we're over Altar, flight level 340. Reset transponder squawk, and then they would identify you and clear you. But really, they're already cleared, and we really knew where they were anyway. But
What
um,
about aircraft type? I don't give aircraft type. I just say my N number.
so if
Because
you have a flight plan in there, whether it's a VFR for advisories or an IFR, they know all that at a glance. The data block, the flight, the strip. It's not paper anymore, but in the computer, it says your type, your equipment, your route, your requested altitude, your current altitude, everything about the whole flight is in there. So you get a handoff from Albuquerque Center coming into LA Center, going to San Diego, say Southwest 236, flight level 280. That's all they want to hear. If they're
right.
climbing, then they would probably ask them to say their current altitude. Southwest 236, flight level 275, climbing to flight level 280, something like that. Um,
Right.
That's
and
good to
that's
know.
it. But yeah, checking in with you, you're going to hear it
It
all the
drives me
time.
bonkers. Yeah, I hear it and I like, don't do that. Like we
Yeah,
know we know he's with you because you're talking to him. Just tell number and altitudes, and that's pretty much it. That's
yeah.
That's
I mean that's
They
what
can
I
see
do.
your they can see your heading, they can see your speed, they can see your altitude. They still want you to say altitude. Altitude is so important that way. Say the altitude, especially if it's a initial sector. So we know that what we're seeing in the data block is what the aircraft is reporting, and that's what you're at. So,
Yeah. Another question. This one, I'm asking for a friend, and normally I'm asking for a friend means I did it, but I don't want to admit I did it. But I truly am asking for a friend.
okay.
Um, he asked, "Will ATC clear an aircraft for an approach to a closed airport and only assume that the pilot knows it's closed?"
So, what do you mean by close? Like the tower went home for the night, or it's actually got X's on the runway?
I think he meant it's NOTAM closed. He may not have checked NOTAMs. He didn't do this, but he's just asking about the situation. Like, say
No,
the
they're not going to clear you. Well, if they do, it's a mistake. But um, in other words, it won't even show up in the database every 45 days if they like what was it that just closed? Nukiyama just closed. The next update, it was no longer in the database. You could not actually put it in the computer to send somebody to that airport.
okay.
That somebody
But what if
asked to
it's
go.
what
Sorry.
if they've got one runway
Uh-huh.
and it's NOTAM closed just temporarily?
Well, it depends on who's controlling it. So the Class Echo airport, no tower, uncontrolled. Basically, the center is responsible for all that. They will give you clearances in or out. They will give you. They can't give you like vectors to final, but they can give you, you know, a fix and an arrival, or approach. So they sort of become like the approach control for that airport. But it's not really like their airport, and there's no tower. So if you said, we do show those NOTAMs. So hopefully somebody basically would have got it printed out, and it would have been on a strip, and it would have popped up as a little notice on the computer and say, "Oh, Imperial's closed temporarily." And then if they forgot about it, yeah, sure, they might clear somebody VOR Alpha approach. But
Mhm.
um, hopefully somebody would
Well,
realize that it's NOTAM
it
closed
is
for whatever reason.
possible, but it also is possible for the pilot and the controller to miss the NOTAM and still
Sure.
clear him for an approach to a closed airport.
Yeah, I mean, so what's Usually, if it's something like that, it's going to be well publicized. Hey, we're going to close Imperial because we're going to repave the runway, or we're going to
Okay.
be working on the adjacent taxiway, and it'll be closed from sundown until the next morning or whatever.
Okay.
And sure, I mean that the crew changes. The new guys come in, they work in the mid shift. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. SkyWest comes out, says, "Hey, we'd like our clearance to Imperial," and the guy does it. Yeah, I mean, that's runway incursions. That's the way the things happens. But the controller would have the NOTAM. The pilot should have been briefed on it when he put his everything together. So, but yeah, it does sometimes go through the cracks, especially if it's something unusual. But other times it's well publicized, and we'll have notices up, big signs like "Imperial's closed tomorrow, dummy," that sort of thing. Um, But
That's
if they knew it was closed and you requested a clearance to it, they're not gonna clear you to it, obviously. You
Right.
know,
Okay.
say intentions. Imperial's closed. What's your intentions? You might
Yeah.
file to it. I mean, you might be in Albuquerque's airspace and coming off the ground from, Tucson or somewhere and filing to Imperial, and they may not be up on it, and the guy gets handed off to you from Yuma, and there you are. "Hey, we'd like the VR Alpha." Say, "Hey, Imperial's closed. What do you wanna do?" So, hopefully somebody catches it before he gets down there on the
Down to the runway.
where the bulldozers are, yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
the giant hole swallows the plane.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Again,
Oh,
most of the time you're doing that, it's because it's severe clear, it's all visual, so hopefully you're going in there and you're gonna say, "Hey, looks like there's a bulldozer on the runway." Okay.
Is
"Hey,
he supposed
Senator."
to be there?
But, yeah, it does get a lot more complex when it's all IFR operations, coming in and out, using the departure procedure or a departure if there is one, and all the arrivals, and basically it's one in, one out because there's no tower, there's no way to sequence. I mean, sometimes if you have a couple guys, they could follow each other if they have each other in sight. They both have the airport in sight, but usually with weather, that kind of goes out the window too. So it's non-radar, one in, one out, and hopefully the
yeah.
guy lands and he remembers to cancel. So
Oh,
That's
I've been the guy behind that guy before. The guy that doesn't cancel, and you're sitting there flying around because the guy in front of you didn't cancel.
well,
So
that's
you
the thing,
kinda lose there.
the visibility starts to drop, so they don't wanna cancel in the air, they're gonna wait till they touch down, then they touch down and, they
Yeah.
forget, they taxi over to the building, and now you can't hear them on the frequency, and they're trying to find the phone number for flight service, and meanwhile,
Yep.
somebody's holding it Imperial going, "When's this guy?"
And then the guy behind him is the one saying, "I wanna cancel my IFR so I can just go land."
Mhm. Yeah, and that's fine too because he would go in, assuming it was, enough for a visual operation, and he'd cancel, go in there, and talk to the guy on CTAF and hopefully find out, "Oh, yeah, sorry, we couldn't get a hold of center, we're over here at the FBO, we're clear, and no
Yep.
problems." And then they've called us back, say, "Yeah, he's fine, he's off the runway, he's done." But, it happens a lot because they plan to cancel on the frequency, and then suddenly our ultra reliable frequencies fail us, and we can't hear him from
On
whatever
the ground.
location he's at, so
Yeah, and I've had that I mean, I have had that happen, and then I've had to call flight service and cancel that way,
yeah.
but a lot of times, if I'm going into an uncontrolled airport where I should be able to get somebody on the ground, but can't, I will always ask, "Can I have a phone number
Oh, yeah,
for
'cause
for the nearest
like
tower?"
SkyWest would have our front desk phone number on speed dial, and that phone, it's 20 feet away would ring, like, "Hey, we're canceling," or, "Hey, we want a clearance out in 20 minutes," whatever the case may be, so they
But I
knew
can see where guys forget 'cause like corporate jets, you do get busy, passengers wanna be on their way, their cars are parked plane-side or unloading bags, and then probably 15 minutes later, I can imagine somebody saying, "Oh, shoot, we forgot to cancel our flight plan."
Mhm.
and that
Yeah.
poor guy behind us is still holding out there, and we better hurry and get out of here because he's gonna be here soon. He's gonna come find us.
Well, we used to get to fly in the cockpit well, we still kinda do now, but before 9/11, it was a lot more, prevalent where you could get a little, jump seat ride and, do a little, see how the other side lived, and I remember flying into Wilmington, North Carolina, and 2 pilots and it was a Embraer, I think, and, coming from Charlotte, and they were cleared on approach, but it was night, but it was VFR, and he gets switched over to advisory, and he's still on the approach, and the one says to the other, says, like, "Do you think they want us to cancel now?" And I said, "They're dying for you to cancel now." I said, "I understand, though, with a certain number of passengers, you can't do that, but
Yeah.
if it's company policy and you're good with the field in sight, cancel, you know?"
Yeah,
So
because then depends, like, also, like, yeah, like, the companies, like, we used to have a procedure flying Part 135, we couldn't cancel in the air, we had to get on the ground and then
yeah.
cancel.
Yeah. I think they relaxed that somewhat, but it was, like, dependent on the conditions and the number of people or something like that, but,
I've got one more question, and I've heard guys on the radio at times get lippy with ATC, and that's one thing if ATC comes back, it's like you never wanna fight that battle with ATC. If they say something to you, say back the answer and just go about and do what you're supposed to do. Have you ever had or have anything stand out in your mind where somebody gave you attitude and it's like, "I'm gonna go stick this guy in a hold."
no, because that's too much work. So, um, I've had occasion where, like, I got a couple guys, a couple of flows coming together and like, "Okay, you know, you're giving me attitude, so guess who's gonna be number 2?" But
Good
even
way to
then
guarantee your space to the back of the line.
yeah, exactly. But even then, it's more like, "Well, I'd like to make him number 2, but he performs so much better," you know? Clear him
Yeah.
direct, tell him to start down. You know, you don't care about that so much as making your life easier, and which is the easier your life is, the better service everybody's gonna get, you know? The next sector is gonna get everybody all lined up and spaced apart, and the pilots aren't gonna get any delays, and everybody will be happy, so, you know,
This
it's
is
just
why there's an age limit because I'd be the guy that go out of his way to make that guy
yeah.
number 2.
Oh, that's the thing. I mean, there's plenty of stories about some old timers that are just all crotchety about it. I remember one of my trainers who had probably been there too long. It was past his prime, and after dealing with a student pilot on a cross country who really needed some help, but not only that, but he was also obvious that English was not his first language. It got to the point where Paul finally said, like, radar service terminated, squawk VFR, and don't ever call me again. The guy must have been traumatized. He probably quit right then, but,
You never know because he's not allowed to call you anymore.
yeah, I know.
Yeah. 'Cause I've heard guys get, quote, "lippy" with ATC. I was out, going into Teterboro one time, and Approach gave a VFR guy a squawk code. He asked for flight following, gave him the squawk code, and he
Mhm.
told him to ident, and he never did. And he
Yeah.
comes back and he goes, I put the code in the transponder. That is the ident." I mean, he gave this controller attitude. I'm like, "Ugh, I do not wanna be that guy."
It's so hard to do that because yeah, so he's kinda taking umbrage because the guy, you know, said you didn't ident, so he's kinda feeling like, I put the code in, I did what I should have." If the controller would, you know, talk back to him, then there's nothing's gonna happen of it. But if he said, like, "You know, sir, if you hit the ident button, it makes it a lot easier for us to see the code on the scope."
It that way he doesn't have to play Where's Waldo.
Yeah,
It just
exactly.
pops right up.
Right.
You know, you might see a V. That's the thing is you might see a V, but it'll change to an I, for instance. And then after a few more updates, it's waiting for a flight plan to be attached to it, and the computer says, like, "Okay, they haven't started a track on this yet, so now it's gonna stay I, but it's gonna show then a code by it." okay, that's the code. So it's going to be a minute or so before he actually knows that that target is the one he just gave the code to. But if he tells them to ident, then instantly 3 flashing bars. Okay,
Yeah.
it's this VFR. There he is. Okay, it changed. He's on the code track, and it tags up and it shows that it's the right code, right altitude, everything else. So it definitely helps. Plus, it's also something that you do for emergency situations because everybody sees it. If
Right.
somebody calls out of the blue and I say, yes, ident a squawk emergency, then all the facilities will see that, whether or not, even if they don't have their altitude limit set to watch for the guy, if he's above or below them, he'll show up on all the scopes,
Everybody's right.
just so we know, who's closest to him and where is he. So, because he says, I mean, I had a guy we tagged up. He says, like, we're near the Colorado River, coming into Blythe, and we're got turned around, and we're not sure where we are, and we're a little worried about our fuel status. And turns out he was about 40 miles south of the border in Mexico.
Well, let's just hope he learned from that, just like I hope everybody can learn from this podcast. And it is nice being able to do this. I think it'll open up a whole new, hopefully open up an avenue to where people can learn more about what's going on the other side, outside
Well,
the cockpit.
I really appreciate your videos. I've been basically learned to fly the CJ4 on the sim thanks to your videos.
Well, thank you. It's good to hear that. And that is the conclusion of the very first The Corporate Pilot Dad podcast. Thank you to everybody for listening, and we'll see you next time.